So you touched on some of the common concerns that come up around substance use,
Mhm.
including people associate it with crisis and people associate it with somebody needs to go to treatment when that might not be the case. That might not even be an option. What are some of the other concerns that come up around substance use and reducing rules? And how can programs get ahead of those?
So I think, and it's a very legitimate concern because I think that what you can sometimes have also are people staying in shelter who alcohol can also be a trigger. The smell, let's say, of alcohol can be a trigger for the abuse that they've experienced. And so it is that balance of, it's not that shelter becomes a happy hour, it's not that, but it is, you want to be respectful of individual experience, which, so how do you respect the individual experience of each person plus create this community? And so you want to be, you want to understand that somebody that maybe smells alcohol on another person, that may be a trigger for them. You may have a number of people in any varying degree of recovery themselves, that if they are around this other person who they're pretty sure is using, that is triggering them to want to use, so, but what you have in this communal living setting is just a microcosm of the world. I don't have to be in shelter to be walking down the street and catch a, a sniff of alcohol for, that kind of thing. So it's more about, I think, open conversations with people. And I don't even necessarily, I mean, I continue sometimes to call them hard conversations, but I think it's just conversations. And I think what we have, unfortunately, what's happened, and I don't want to blame everything on social media and texting, but I do feel like there is a little bit of a lost art to just being able to sit with somebody and to listen and to talk. It doesn't mean that you're going to have all the answers. I don't think that it is our jobs as advocates to have all the answers. That person's life is their life. They were living a life before they met you. It may have not been, when you hear parts of their story, it may have not been the life that you would want to lead yourself or the life you would want for them. However, it is their life. So they've come to you for this snapshot of time. I mean, it's just a minuscule amount of time you have with somebody, right? Once they leave, they're going to live their life, whether you're there or not. So how can you make the best of whatever that situation is and give the most of resources and information and support? How can you make every moment count, basically? So not having all the answers is okay, but everybody deserves respect, kindness. If you want to think about it, I know sometimes people get a little weird about the term customer service, but when you think about customer service, the customer's always right, is what we hear. Well, that's not really true. But when you walk away from an interaction, you should feel heard, you should feel seen, you should feel that you matter. And so when we're looking at substance use, we know that there are going to be some people that are struggling with substances. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have some sort of rule that, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to find a shelter that doesn't have some kind of rule that says we ask that, or there's no alcohol or illegal substances on site. Okay, that's a common one. I don't think that's necessarily a bad one. I mean, but how is it presented? Is it just presented as can't do it here or you're going to be kicked out? Or is it presented as we ask that you not do that here? If you'd like to talk with an advocate about substance use, if this is something you'd like to talk more about, we're here to help you. Here are some resources. There's also the whole risk reduction of safety planning around substance use. And I know that may sound weird, but somebody's use of substances, we need to be safety planning with them like we would around anything else. You know, if they're worried about seeing their abuser when they're out, and that maybe that group is kind of their support system too, but there's also substances involved there. I think we need to peel that back a little bit and help people try and, yeah, safety plan with them. If somebody has a substance use challenge, issue, they're struggling, they're trying to manage it, it doesn't mean they're just going to stop. And as weird as it might sound, it's like, okay, if this person is going to use, what is a safer way for them to do that? And so one of the things, and and it is a newer kind of thing, and it's not even the majority of programs in Missouri, but I do know there are several programs in Missouri that have gone through the training for Narcan, so that staff is trained, but also that there is an availability for survivors as well. And we've talked to medical professionals. Even if the person, it's not an opioid type of thing, and you do the Narcan treatment, it actually does not hurt them. So that's another kind of thing. If you're worried about that, it's not going to hurt somebody. Put it that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's as non-toxic as water.
Exactly. So I think that I think that when we're looking at substances within shelter, it's just, they're there and they always have been. It's just, what I want is to create environments and atmospheres in which people don't feel that they have to hide it, but instead they can be honest with advocates about it and know that they are not going to get in trouble, but that they can talk about it and that they can help. And I'm not saying that it's one of those things that, for example, you may end up having to have many conversations. I don't think the first conversation should be, if you use again and come back impaired, we're asking you to leave. I don't think that's the first conversation. There may be that happens at some point. I don't have a magic number, but there may be, depending upon what the situation is, that you might have to be like, this just isn't working, and here's why, kind of thing. But I still think that we need to be able to have those conversations honestly and openly. We need to acknowledge that whether we like it or not, there's a power differential between somebody who works in the building and somebody who lives in the building. And it is the weirdest thing that people work where we live, or we work where they live, and they live where we work. That's just a weird scenario, right? So how do we create an environment in which it is welcoming, and it is where somebody is living temporarily, and we're keeping it as safe as possible for everyone, but knowing that people are flawed, and we need to create, what we don't want to do is create these scenarios where our rules inadvertently could feel like or look like the abusive environment they just came out of. Yeah. One of the examples that I have, which is not necessarily substance use, but it's around children. How we ask people in shelter with children to parent, we want to be, I think, very conscious of and very kind about. And when we have rules that say things like you're responsible for your child 24/7, I would like to see those kinds of things either taken away or rewritten. I would think that any parent, that would be very condescending to see something like that. And even though sometimes parenting's in the eye of the beholder as well, even though sometimes what we see in how somebody's parenting might not match what we think it does, we need to check ourselves on that. That's our issue, not necessarily theirs all the time. And the other thing is I promise you that person knows they're responsible for their child, or they never would have attempted to bring them with them. So I just want to throw that out, that they know they're responsible. It's just sometimes how we see responsibility. Yeah. So that's one of those things just overall in thinking about rules as well. Yeah.
Yes. It
Yeah.
makes me think about how we often approach rules as something that can prevent something from
Yeah.
happening. And if that thing is going to happen, a
It's
sentence
good.
written down in a handbook is not
Exactly.
going to stop it.
Yeah. What's fascinating to me is that, and I've looked at, I don't even know how many number of resident handbooks, and I love looking at them. I do love looking at them. And I have made many recommendations about them as well. And it's interesting to me how many times I can, much like the Cheetos, no Cheetos in the room, you start to pick up on how a rule came about. One of the things, and this goes with any of your rules, when you look at reducing rules, as a staff, I really would sit with your rule book, go through every one of those rules, and give me a reason why you have to have it. If you can't explain why it's there, you probably don't need it. Rules, much like forms, when they're developed, we tend not to go back and review them very often. We just add, like on a form, you just add another question, which was how we ended up with like 5-page intake forms, right? It's not that we needed all the information. We just didn't want to go back and change. So yes, that's a whole other thing. But the same happens with our handbooks, is we tend not to review those very often. And instead this thing happens and it's like, oh, we need to do a rule about that. And it gets added. There needs to be a reason for the rule. And you need to be able to explain more than just safety and liability. Okay. I could almost say safety and liability on every rule I see, but I need to explain what that means. And if we think about our rules, what's funny about safety and liability, I'm not an attorney, but what I do know about safety and liability, the more information you have, the more liable you actually become. So I was reviewing, this was even for another state, reviewing one of their handbooks, and it actually gave directions as to how you come out of the building, you turn whatever direction, you go to this corner, and that's where you cross the street. Very specific, right?
Yeah.
So when I was talking with them, I was like, okay, I've got a scenario in my head of why it says that, but can you tell me why it's so specific? Now, the person was a newer staff person. They're like, yeah, I have no idea. And I said, okay, here's what I think happened. I think somebody, when they left your building, tried to jaywalk across the street and almost got hit by a car. I don't know if that's what happened, but I'm thinking that could have happened. Or God forbid, somebody actually did get injured or something by trying to cross the street. And so they thought, we've got to make a rule to specifically tell people how to cross the street. I understand it. The thing with that is, even if I follow all your directions, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be hurt. And so you've just increased your liability because I followed all your directions and I still got hurt. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just one of those kind of, when you're looking at rules, regardless of whether it's around substance use or anything, you want to be able to say, why do we have it? Do we need that rule? What happens if we don't have that rule? Because another question, and it goes back to what you just said, is just writing it down doesn't make it stop, right? Just like walking through the threshold doesn't make me all of a sudden not have a substance use issue. The rules normally, often, yeah, it didn't stop everybody from doing it. Very common for folks to have curfews in shelter. I don't know of any shelter with a curfew that can tell me that everybody abides by that curfew. And then along with the curfew, if you're going to be late, you're supposed to call. Also, bet I can't find a shelter that everybody abides by curfew and calls if they're going to be late. Okay. So if you're going to have a curfew, just know people are not always going to meet it. If they don't meet it, what happens? Is it an automatic exit? I hope not. Or is it, hey, I noticed it's hard for you to get back by this time. What's happening? Is there a reason that is a hard time for you to get back here by? And then I want you to ask, do you need a curfew? I want you to have that conversation as a staff. Do you need the curfew? I think before you reduce any rules though too, or during the course of doing that, one of the questions you just want to throw out pretty early is, what are you afraid of? What are your fears? Get them out. Get them out. Be willing to check your biases. Be willing to check your fears and get that stuff out and talk about it. Because the other part of, I think, what makes any program work is the ability to debrief with each other. And so whether there's a rule there or not, you're going to have bad things that happen. And you've got to be able to talk to each other about those, and you've got to be able to debrief, which means being able to talk about fears. Yeah.